what school do you go to? People have their personal preferences, but it's a lot easier if you can say, hey, look, this one meets the American National Standards Institute definition of a standard for providing executive protection.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
EP standardization in the United States and the work of the Board of Executive Protection Professionals. It's a big topic, an emotive topic, standardization wherever you sit. Today, we're going to be speaking with James Cameron, chairman of the board. And, it's really good to get into it because I know a lot of work has already been done. So it's a great time to interview James. I'm here with Sean West. Why do you think standardization, what a fun word, remains an emotive topic for the industry?
It's a huge topic, not just in the United States, but here in the UK also. I mean, I've lived through the period of when I first came into the industry and they implemented the SIA license within the UK and all of the problems that came with that. When I first got into the industry, it mattered which training school you went to do your course, and employers would look at what course you had done, who you trained with. And then whilst bringing licensing in is a very good thing, it brought out the criminality aspect that was rife within the industry. So it worked on that part. However, once it set the standard for licensing, then all training providers, it didn't matter which course you went to, you come out with the same piece of paper, the same license. So whilst I spent a lot of money to go to the training school I went to because I wanted to learn from them, they had a fantastic reputation. As time went on, whilst licensing came in, it was good. The reputation of the school didn't seem to matter because employers, all they need is a license and they want bums on seats. And the question they ask you now, it's not who did you train with, it's are you licensed? So whilst it's good, it does throw some curveballs in, which, whilst it betters the industry in one way, it can harm it in another.
Now that is an excellent point because we see standardization as a great goal that we all want to get behind, a minimum standard and so on. But then, does it matter? In the world of work in corporations, they seem to favor some universities over others, yet it's one degree. Mm-hmm. But I wonder if that same approach would work if you just want licensed operatives, because it's not the high-end creme de la creme work that has ever had a problem with this. If you're not up to scratch, you won't get that type of work. It's the not so high-end work that we have this challenge with. And then are we going to solve it by creating a minimum standard that came from perhaps a school that's not as, well known as another one? It is a big topic. And America, the United States in particular, and you might say, why have we got two Brits talking about this? Well, I think we're perfectly placed because we're outside and we can look in and say, well, different licensing arrangements in the States mean, X, Y, and Z ramifications. So if the Board of Executive Security Professionals is able to pull together a degree of reciprocity between states, or perhaps something that compels people to need the standard, I think that's one thing. And then on the other side of the coin, I guess, Sean, how important is it to have the customer behind this decision-making process? Because how do we know? The customer might say, yeah, absolutely, I want a new standard. How do we know that we go off and do it and then they're going to actually, require it?
I think when SIA licensing came in the UK, I think the customer, I may be incorrect here, but when I started out in the industry and I applied for jobs, employers used to ask for people who had been to this training school or that training school. That question is never asked now. They just ask, are you licensed? And I think it's kind of now up to the individual. They get their license, and then it's the further career development that they carry out themselves, the experience they get themselves, that will get them into the higher positions. But the customer needs to ask these questions to find out, what qualifications do these guys have? Are they experienced? Because they don't know what training school they've gone to now, because generally they don't ask. They just ask, have you got that license? So yeah, it's definitely an emotive topic. And I can see in the States, it's not one license for the whole country like it is in the UK. So it can be even more emotive because different training providers want to have their say on things, and it may be different to another training provider. So there needs to be a consensus, a neutral party in the middle that can take advice from the training providers, but they don't have a commercial interest in the licensing itself.
That's right, and I think, maybe I'm misunderstanding the mission of the board, but I think that's their goal. They have working groups, and in fact, a few shout outs to people that we've had on our podcast before. On their board, they've got Joe Ortera, so great to see that. A great friend of the industry. I know their vice chairman Gerard Bonillo. Great work, and I think Chuck Andrews is also involved amongst a host of other people. So certainly some very credible people working on this, subject matter experts. I think sort of 19 subject matter experts. That's what they've brought together for their top level board. Well, I tell you what, let's talk to James and let's find out, because there's been a lot of talk on social media. Oh, they're doing X, Y, and Z. Let's hear it from James and let's find out what their mission is and how we can learn from their efforts to create a new standard in EP.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit magazine.
Standardization and a new dawn for the EP industry, particularly in North America, but also beyond. Today, we're here with James Cameron, Chairman of the Board of Executive Protection Professionals. It's a great pleasure to have you on. How are you doing?
I appreciate it. I appreciate the time today, sir.
Well, this is a big topic, and we've seen a lot of your efforts online and, of course, at the IPSB and beyond to, really catalyze this modernization and standardization for the industry. But let's do our quick fire questions. What is the problem that you're trying to solve in the industry right now?
Well, right now, there are no standards. There's no place for one individual, no matter where you're at in your career field, to go and reference. You can reference individuals' books or maybe best practices, but there's actually no standard of how do we deliver proper executive protection. Okay.
And I mean, why is this a passion of yours? Where does your passion for this topic come from?
My passion comes from just a quality assurance, standpoint on this. How are we delivering the best service possible to our client and also to our employees or those that we staff, or as an individual, how are you performing to the highest level? If there's no standard to kind of model after, well, we don't know. We don't know if we're actually meeting or exceeding or if we're below standard. And that's dangerous in this industry.
Indeed, dangerous. If the quality is not met, then you don't want to go down that path. But what about the uninitiated out there, the people that have no real appreciation for standards or anything like this? What would your message to them be?
Well, I mean, it's like when any seasoned professional or people that have been in the industry for a minute, we get new guys all the time and say, hey, what's the best training school that I should go to? I want to learn EP. I want to get involved. I don't know what I don't know. So where do I go? Well, it's very hard you can point them into different directions, but at the end of the day, do those schools really meet any kind of standard? It'd be great to take the uninitiated and say, hey, go to this school because they actually go off of a validated, standard process of how to perform executive protection. And let me just reference one thing. I have gotten a lot of concerns, I would say. A standard isn't a end all be all, right? The standard is the base level of service, but it's a standardization of how do we do things. Now, can you go above and beyond? Absolutely. Can you meet or exceed standard? Yes. So I think there's a lot of confusion out there that when you say there's a standard, you are at the exceeds level, when that's not the goal. The goal is to say, look, on an advance, we want to be friendly and courteous to those hotel members that we're meeting, this, that, and the other. Going above and beyond may be that you bring a gift for the security director, right, to be able to get more things for your client. So that's going above and beyond. That's not going to be in the standard of writing, hey, bring a gift to the security director, but being courteous is in the standard. Does that make sense? So I think I want to clear that up, because I think people do get confused that it's not the exceeds level. We're starting with a baseline. Here's a standard. Here's a basic standard of how do we operate. And now let's move forward. So when we get back to the uninitiated, what school do you go to? People have their personal preferences, but it's a lot easier if you can say, hey, look, this one meets the American National Standards Institute definition of a standard for providing executive protection.
I like that, and well, you mentioned the schools, and obviously there's rivalry out there in the world, and
sure,
there's competition. It is a hot topic in itself. But before we get into some of the questions that at least a lot of people have been asking, because your initiative has been making a lot of waves, I'd like to just explore, how did it all come about? Can you tell us a little bit about the board and who's involved and how it all came together?
Sure. So I've been completely transparent about this for a long time. I used to be part of the ASIS International Executive Protection Council, back when it was a council, before it was a community. And around 2017, 2018 timeframe, 2016 rather, 2018, we had written a proposal to submit to ASIS that there needs to be an executive protection standard. And for whatever reason, they opted not to do that, whether there was no return on investment, whatever the reason is, they opted not to accept the council's application to write a standard. Okay, so fast forward, and one of our, some of our board members, actually, before they were board members, said, well, James, why don't you just do it? And I started doing the research, and I said, okay, let me reach out to ANSI, or the American National Standards Institute. I said, how do you, what's the process to become a standards developer? What do I need to do? And I started following that path. And then as I was doing that, I started developing the board members that we have. And if you've seen the board members, which are all online, again, we're full transparency, everything is posted. Very diverse background. We've got subject matter experts. We've got a doctor on our board. We've got drone pilot on our board. We've got somebody that does strictly TSCM. We also have State Department diplomatic security specialists that have been doing that for their career. We've got Secret Service. We've got a whole variety of backgrounds to fill all these different niches on everything that has to, well, not everything, but all the major topics in executive protection. So it's not like, James Cameron's on the board and I went to school that taught TSCM for one day, and now I'm going to write that section for TSCM for others to review. No, we've actually got somebody that's been in TSCM for 30 years doing that. Same thing with drone. So I really pulled from a very dynamic group of individuals. And I did shy away, again, full transparency, shied away from people that had training schools. There's a lot of quality people out there. However, we didn't want the image of we're developing a standard based off their protocols. And that would be an image, right? Obviously we take a lot of flack. A lot of people like what we're doing, but there's a lot of naysayers out there about what we're doing. And the last thing we want is, well, you've got so-and-so that runs this school, so everything you're putting in the standard must be based off of his training doctrine. And we didn't want that image at all. So we didn't do that. When we have our board members, all of our board members work in some form or capacity with EP, whether it's doing the job, having a business that hires people for EP, or has specific skill sets that support EP, like our doctors, our drone pilot, TSCM. So it's a wide, diverse group. And we also shied away a little bit from, those that are, social media famous. We didn't want that image either. We wanted real professionals. Not saying that they're not professional by any means, but we really wanted a whole group of people that had the depth and background to be able to support what we're doing.
I like it. It's almost the gray person within the gray person realm.
Right.
No, that's really interesting. I'm curious. Obviously, over here we have the SIA. were there any international standards or regimes that you sort of took inspiration from, or thought, that's quite good?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I again, from the outside, I think the SIA looks good on paper, but talking to people that have actually had to utilize it with practice, say that there's problems with it, and there's going to be problems with anything. I know there's a lot of people that say that we should have something in the U.S. similar to the SIA, because we run into that problem all the time about licensing and state to state and everything else. We're not trying to dive into that legal realm. We're definitely separate from regulations, state, all that. We're just working on a application standard of how to do the business, of providing security. I will say that we're also looking at potentially, once we get the ANSI, looking at ISO 9001 for total quality management. And I think that the EP side would fit into that category. I know there's another new ISO that just came out. Maybe you know a little bit better. I think it's like 7,000 something, where it's risk management, but it's travel risk management ISO. So there is something that so there is openings in ISO as well to marry up to the ANSI, what we're doing. But I think for us as Americans, you have to have the ANSI first, and that'll make the transition to ISO a little bit better. ISO, I lived in Dubai for several years working for a client, so I understand in America, we don't use the term KPIs very often, or key performance indicators, and that's a big ISO check mark, right? How else are you going to validate what you're doing if you don't have key performance indicators? And we're with the standard, we may bring some of that blend into this as well. So you do have key performance indicators when you're doing movements, advances, medical treatment, things like that.
And so I guess maybe there's a chicken and egg question to all of this. Is there demand for a standard? And if there is demand, who's demanding it?
Great question. Surprisingly, very much surprising to me, without us reaching out, we have had Fortune 500 and 100 company CSOs contact us, thirsty for this. They are, and these are people that you don't see on social media. They're teams you don't see on social media. I mean, let's be honest, we know everybody in the social media realm knows one another on the EP world, but there's a whole nother gray man area that you don't know. Who's the protection detail members for Coca-Cola? They're not on Instagram. They're not on Facebook. They're not on social media, right? So that group over there, I'm not saying Coca-Cola necessarily, just an example, but we have had a lot of CSOs that are contacting us saying, this is fantastic because we really do not have anything to judge our teams on. We don't know if our teams are meeting or exceeding standards. Now we know culturally what we put in place, business culture wise, what we put in place as far as a standard, but who's to say that we're right? And they've made the comments that said we cannot use anything but an ANSI or ISO to really validate what we're doing. We can't use somebody's personal book because that's their personal idea, that's their personal technique, right? If it's not a standard, then ultimately it's a technique. So we've all written books, right? I've written a book on active shooter. It's not a standard. It's my technique on how I approach active shooter. Well, it's the same thing with EP. People can write books, but unless it's gone through these stringent processes of becoming recognized by a third party as a standard, then it's a technique. And companies and organizations can't use technique to, judge how their teams are doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally does, especially with some of the larger corporations where everything must go through a standard check.
Correct. Because now you've got legal involved, you got HR involved. I mean, I've worked in the private sector for some years now, before I had my company. And the first thing they're going to say is, well, if you mark somebody down or if you write somebody up for not performing, well, based on what? What's the paper trail? What are you referencing? And you can reference your company SOPs or your standard operating procedures, but those SOPs should also be backed up by some sort of actual documentation that is a standard or ISO. For those in the audience, ISO is International Standard Organization. Sorry.
No. You'd hope that they know, but they might not. You never know. Because we got the British standards. We got the EC, European directives transposed to international law. All sorts of standards out there.
Right.
And you mentioned some of these companies that we don't know. Like we don't know who's there. It's really interesting that you mentioned these companies where you don't see their employees all over social media and you don't know who they are. My wider security work, I'm delighted and surprised when I uncover a whole new genre of security professionals that don't talk to anyone else. They don't go to the ASIS events. They don't go to ATAP. They don't go to anything. And luxury. They only hang out with other luxury people often. Gambling, gaming. They love hanging out with each other. Family offices as well. So that's an interesting angle there, because that would help cut across genres. But I'm interested. Do you think a snag will ultimately be the separation of standard and licensing? I'm thinking, of course, the SIA model being divided in what you're proposing.
Well, we're actually, it's funny you bring that up. So I'm licensed in the state of Nevada under the private investigator licensing board. That's where my security company is licensed out of. And talking to the director over there, he is part of a new group that is standing up. That is a national group within the U.S. And this group has, I think, 30 some odd states that are signing on. States, attorney generals and things like that are signing into this, where they're actually talking about how can we allow people to operate in the security field on a temporary basis. So if you have a client that lands in New York is a horrible example because they're very strict, but just as an example, if you land in New York and you've met the licensing requirements in New York under this new umbrella, then you can travel to, say, Nevada and operate if it's for a limited amount of time, up to 7 to 10 days. Anything further than that, then you have to have a license in Nevada. But so if as your client travels, you can go around. They reached out to us because they may utilize this standard as something that as a criteria for that license. Does that make sense? So
equivocacy. We have that in the European Union.
Right. So you've got to have some reciprocity, right? So if you apply, if you're a good operator, business owner, I'll take myself for example, and I put myself through the training, the required training, pay the required dues, I would then hold a specific license that is good in X states, right? Well, how does that license come about? Where are they drawing that information on? What qualifications do I need to have to attain that license? There's no standard right now to do that. That's where, they're talking to us now saying, well, once we get that standard, now we've got something that we can say, and this is all hype. The process isn't there, but it may say you need 40 hours worth of training by a certified instructor that meets this standard and will issue that license. And now you are good to travel in various states, that wasn't our angle. They approached us, but it was because there's nothing out there that says this is the American National Standards Institute standards for providing executive protection. There's never been anything. So they've never had a reference point. Hope I didn't go on too long on that answer.
No, I like it. I know, and I can see how that would work, and you wouldn't necessarily have to deprive each state from their lovely revenue that they love accumulating. Right. Just that reciprocity is what we need. What would you say to those out there who said, well, anything you propose, as you said, it's a base level, you can exceed it. Anything you propose is undoubtedly well below my own personal standard. And therefore, what's the point? Why have a standard at all if my own personal standard is so much better? Is there really a class of operator that's operating beneath the standard you're proposing?
Oh God, yes. Absolutely. No, I would unequivocally say yes. The things that and this is just again what we see on social media. How many times have we all seen last minute detail tomorrow, $45 an hour, EP, black suit. That's beneath the standard, right? Because you've done no background check on that individual. You've done no training verification on that individual. You are simply filling a body with a position, right? Part of our standard is, even for members that are, and I'll be honest. So we've got, for this standard has to be inclusive. So we've had it out there for a long time where we have we're putting together a technical committee and a working group. And this is where the feedback says, if I say something, this is my standard, this is how I do things, and I put it out to the group and the group goes, yeah, that's not right. That's not right. And we changed the verbiage. Well, now that's getting the feedback. Now, okay. None of those people can have derogatory marks in their backgrounds. I'm not talking speeding tickets or DUIs, but like if you are a felon, you're not qualified to have a say, unfortunately, right? And in this industry, there are people with felonies that are operating, and again, that's beneath the standard. So, just doing that little due diligence is important, and that's just a basic. We're in the security field. That should be a basic thing. Let alone talking about medical oversight. How many teams have EMTs or paramedics working on their team that don't have medical oversight? Well, that's illegal. You can't do that. You have to have a medical director. Right. And that's where we have our doctor, and he's a medical director for Massachusetts State Police. So he brings that knowledge of the legality of oversight from state to state. Because what you carry in a med bag in Nevada, you may not be able to carry in a med bag in California. And as soon as you do, that's a felony. Right. So that's where we start coming in and we talk about the standard. Now, we're not going to get in the standard. We're not going to talk about the state regulations for each state. But what we are going to do is bring it to the attention saying, hey, look, this is something you need to know about. And if you don't have an answer to, you need to find out. Do you have an EMT on your team? Yes, I do. Who's his medical director? Well, we don't have one. Okay, that's a problem. Right. And then we got to go into, and that starts with the team education. And then also it bleeds over into client education. Well, why am I paying for a medical director or whatever the cost? Well, because legally you have to, because this, that, and the other. We can't educate our clients if we're not educated ourselves. And those are just some simple examples where, yeah, we are operating below standard.
That paints quite a stark picture. And of course, we'd hope most of our colleagues don't operate that way. And actually, this reminds me a little bit of a session we did with Richard H. He's a big proponent of standards over here.
Oh, yeah, I've spoke to him.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the questions then this sort of leads to is, are we asking turkeys to vote for Christmas? In that, in most areas of business, we find people say, I want deregulation, I want less involvement. Are we actually asking for more regulation? Or are we asking for it to just be there so that we have no choice but to meet it? Again, it's another chicken and egg scenario. Shouldn't we be getting the customer to ask for it? Because obviously one of the criticisms has been that customers literally do a Google, I'm going to Montana, who's there? Yeah, you'll do, job done. Compliance, checkbox ticking, and maybe this standard would stop them being able to do that.
Well, I think this standard will help separate the professionals from the amateurs, right? Because you want to be a professional, you want to operate as a professional, and I believe the majority of the industry wants to operate like a professional. They want to. There just isn't anything there for them to have a baseline, and we've actually developed a standard, and it's going to be in one package, one document, but we've actually broken it down to where you can now visually see a career progression, which isn't out there right now, right? So we've actually got 3 separate categories, and each category builds on the previous category, which is never done. So right now, if you're an EP guy or gal, I go to school A, right? And I go to school A, I get the certificate. Currently, the career progression is now I'm going to go to school B. But school B is teaching the same thing as school A does. It's just a different group of instructors, a different t-shirt that you get, different hat, whatever. But you're still learning advances, motorcade, maybe some shooting. You're still learning some fundamentals. Whereas when we break it down, it's like, okay, at the foundation point, you need to know about advances. You need to know about solo practitioners, how to move in formations if you have multiple people. You need to know these estate security, right? That's some foundational stuff. Now we move into career progression, and now that's where you start getting into maybe some TSCM, right? Because that's an advancement. That's not base knowledge. TSCM, some advanced medical stuff. right? And so there's a whole host of other questions. And then once you do that, you do career management, and now you're talking family office, right? Because family office is much different than estate security. Family office is managing assets and a lot of and the estate security and staff and global risk management, GSOC, or Global Security Operations Center. So we've actually parsed it out. So there's an actual career progression that you can see in the standard, and each one of those could be its own standalone standard. So for those that don't want to do this, fine. That's fine. We just want something out there for the professionals, and those professionals can then educate their clients, and ultimately, clients going to pay for a premium service. And if you can articulate and explain why you're a premium service, because we meet and exceed these standards. So if we've got a standard that says you got to do A, B, and C, well, we do that, but we do D, E, and F as well as an added value. Okay. Oh, all right. Now we're talking, and that's going to help lift the entire industry. And getting back to what you said, because I've heard this argument too, is why don't we have the client ask for this? Well, the clients don't know what they don't know. But again, I'll circle back to these Fortune 100 and 500 companies that are contacting us that have seen what we're doing and saying how hungry they are for this because it's not out there and they do need something. So I think there's a whole subgroup of, like you said before, people you never see on social media. You don't know they're out. You know they're there, but you don't know they're there. But they're lurking in the wings and they're seeing what's going on and they're staying out of it for the most part because they're how many people claim that they do Warren Buffett security? You're going to tell me that guy doesn't have security? Of course he does, but you never see those guys, right? And they're out there. And when this standard starts coming on, it's going to be something that they're going to be able to utilize, put in their toolbox. They may not follow everything, which is fine. You pick what you need, but at least you've got a baseline you can reference.
And why not? Why not additionally, or instead, partner with some sort of higher education body to create a level 5 international type of qualification? Why go down the standard route and not the qualification route? Is it that simple, or is it a different topic?
Well, that's kind of putting the cart before the horse, right? Or the chicken before the egg. And this is something, again, we've been transparent about everything. We are going to develop the Certified Executive Protection Professional designation, which will be third-party proctored. So it's not us, we write the test and we'll go through, we're actually talking with the Society of Human Resources right now, SHRM, which is kind of the human resource side of ASIS. And they have their own board certification, just like ASIS has their board certification. And we're working with them on our development and things like that. So we can, if you wanted to, earn your Certified Executive Protection Professional designation. And again, it's not going to be a certificate of completion. It's not a certificate of training. It's you take the standard, you study off the standard, and then you go and take this test. But there's qualifiers first, of course. But then that certification is only good for 3 years. And during that 3-year time, you have to submit that you have continuing education or other things within that 3 years on a point system where you've gone to a security conference. Okay, that's worth 3 points. You wrote a book. Okay, that's worth 5 points. You know what I mean? And then you give that to us, and at the end of the 3 years, it's renewed. But it's not in perpetuity. And I think that's the problem is people go to a training school and they get these fancy 3-letter letters after their name. And they've been a truck driver for the last 5 years because there's no EP work, but yet I'm an EP guy. Well, no, you're not, right? So that's one of the things that we're trying to, that is a follow-on. So you can't have the board certification without having the standard as reference material. So that one we are working on. We've already got the trademark in for it. We've done all of the due diligence ahead of time of what we can do without actually having the standard in the test. Does that answer?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm excited about that because again, that's great for the guys in the field. You see an EP job posting, I live in Las Vegas, but MGM say they hire for their protection team. And on your resume, you've got that you're a board certified executive protection professional. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, I look up the website. It says, okay, you got at least 5 years verifiable executive protection training. You've got driving training. You've got weapons training, and you've passed a 250 question test with the 80% pass rate. Or 80% requirement. So I mean, whatever the list is, but it's verifiable. Other than you went to school A. Well, I don't know who's at school A. I don't know that guy.
So that brings up
right?
a sort of a prickly one, and I had two more prickly types of issues. Currently, it would appear from the outside looking in, that we are in an alumni-based system. Where a particular school and their alumni is more important perhaps than what they have learned. And so if I set up a school tomorrow and I just created an EP course, even if I met your standard, it would probably not get as much traction. And if there was the qualification, then perhaps it would open up anyone to set up a school to get that qualification. So how will we manage the prickly sort of alumni club issue?
So we would for that, and a great question. It would be kind of up to your marketing and your sales, and it would be also and again, we're still in the crawl phase of this. But it would be one of those things that if you open a school, you would let us know, saying, look, I want to be validated that I meet these standards. Anybody can have the standard, right? It's going to be in print version. They'll have it. But to have the board come out and be able to validate that, yes, you are meeting standards, and here's the process. We look at your curriculum, we look at your instructors, we go through the process of validating that you are teaching to the standard, and then periodically we do validation checks where we don't let you know, because I think that's the worst is, of course I'm gonna be there in 2 weeks, make sure you guys are good. No, that's garbage, right? We show up and the class is what it is. And now for you can market and you have that stamp of approval saying, look, hey, we meet standards and our curriculum meets standards. The people that have been in business for 40 years that don't want to do that simply say, you need to come to our school because we've been doing it for 40 years. Let them stand on that. But we all know things have changed in 40 years, right? Your longevity doesn't equal quality. But if you open a school today and you said, look, we meet the Board of Executive Protection Professional standards, we train to the ANSI standard, and we've been validated. If I was recommending a school and I wouldn't know you from Adam, I would point you in that school's direction versus some school that's been around for 10, 15, 5 years that doesn't say that they meet any kind of standard or they don't follow any standard. Does that make sense?
It does.
So I mean,
and even within the American higher education system, Yale might offer a degree, and College X in the middle of nowhere might offer a degree. They're both degrees, but they still have a name.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a valid point. But again, it really depends on how that school decides to market that, and if they want to meet. I mean, we've gotten pushback and we've also gotten applause, right? You get pushback from those that if a training school A, they may not want to change anything because from their eyes, they're doing everything perfect or they're exceeding whatever they think we're going to come up with, even though we haven't come up with it yet. Just arrogance or, bravado is saying we're already beating that. Well, we haven't written it yet. We have, just to put it in context, we have 174 people, professionals that signed up to be part of our technical committees and working groups. So that's a good cross section of the industry that's going to have input on what the standard is. And you do it one way, I do it another, but we're going to have to meet in the middle to get it written down. And that middle, that's that sweet spot. So, you're going to have those egotistical guys on the left. You're going to have those new guys in the industry on the right. But we're going to come to the center and we're going to develop that. And again, I think that's what really sets us apart from what everybody else is doing. We have to meet certain requirements. And that's part of it. It's not the board of executive protection professionals that's writing this standard. No, we're driving the train. We're managing the process, but it's the individuals that signed up from the industry that are writing the standard.
And those individuals, this is the second prickly thing, right? But I think we need to explore it, because I can foresee them saying, "Oi, why didn't I ask this?" The more experienced operators and the inexperienced operators, for me, they are the most challenging groups for you and for the standard, because on the one hand, yes, an inexperienced operator has a challenge that they may be wholly unsuited to EP. Their demeanor, their stature, their level of fitness might be sort of okay, but they're never going to be fit enough, maybe, or I don't know, whatever, we don't know, or maybe they just have the wrong outlook on things. And then on the more experienced side, I wonder, the challenge is, what do we do? Do we grandfather people in? Do we acknowledge? Do we give them brownie points for having spent 40 years in the field? How will we help the 2 points?
As far as meeting the standard or writing the standard?
No, obtaining it. So if I'm 30 years experienced, what do I do? Do I get grandfathered in to the new standard? Do we just say you get a pass, you're fine? Because for me, the two challenging groups are the completely uninitiated that will achieve the standard but will never get work because for whatever reason they're just not cut out, and then the people who are 20, 30 years in, are we going to be nice and benevolent to them and say, right, you get an automatic standard?
Well, once the standard is just a book, right? It's a training. It's not a training manual. It's a manual of how to provide executive protection. So we're not going to be sitting there telling anybody you meet or exceed standard. That's going to be up to the management team of whoever they're working for, right? To go through the book like anybody would and say, okay, here's what it says to do for advances. However, we're going to do A, B, and C, which is required or says is part of the standard, but we're going to do D, E, and F as well. And we might throw in Z, right? And so it's going to be up to the individual organizations and team managers to say whether they meet standard. I mean, it's a book. We're not going to go around and, if you call me up and say, hey, I read your book and I have this experience, do I meet standard? Well, I don't know. I've never seen you operate, right? I've never seen you work. So it's going to be that guideline for those detail leaders, those directors of security, VPs of security, those CSOs, to utilize that standard in conjunction with whatever they're already doing to say whether their teams meet standard or not. So yeah, it's not us coming out and validating. We may come out and validate a school if that's what they request, to say that they're training on the standard, but we're not there. We're not in the business to tell people, hey, you're working a standard or not. Does that make sense?
It does. That's fair. And I think that really helps enlighten or shine a light onto some of the fears that some people might have had, like, oh no, I'm nearly at the end of my career. What do I need to suddenly go and retrain? And I think that's a better perspective you've just sort of outlined.
I think some of those people that are 30, 40 years in their career, the standard might actually help them in the sense of with the newer technology that they're not used to using, right? There's guys that have been doing protection for a long time that they don't use certain phone apps, and we're not going to list out phone apps, right? But we're going to say, here's some that are out there that you might want to have a secure chat. Here's flight trackers, right? So, I mean, and flight trackers, that was something that, 10 years ago, we didn't have those apps where you could just type in the tail number and it come in. You'd have to go to the FBO and you'd have to go up to the desk and be like, hey, how far out are they? So I think some of the things that we'll put in here would actually help those people that have been in for a long time, because there's going to be new tools or no tricks of the trade, or TTPs, right? Tactics, techniques,
procedures.
Tactics. Yeah, there you go. Tactics, techniques, and procedures that have changed over the years. That they go, oh, like I think before we started recording, well, I had mentioned when you start talking about drones or autonomous vehicles, I'm thinking of things that are aerial, things that are flying. Well, there's a whole world of submersibles out there that we could use to check the holes of boats. Okay, didn't think about that, right? And so even for someone like me that's been doing this for a long time, when that got brought up, I was like, oh, that's a great thing. So this standard, they may flip pages, go, yep, I know that, yep, I know that. Oh, wait a minute, that's new.
Yeah, or they might rail
great.
against it. I say that jokingly. We had Mark Fulmer on talking about robots being your best bud, and we did get lots of, shall we say, fan mail?
Sure.
Say, there's no way we're going to be running around with a robot buddy.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the book is it's it's some hard digital book or on the digital, but I think there's going to be information that will help everybody, even for our technical committee and our working group. So let me break the technical committee is the voting body. They're the consensus group that at the end of the process, they're making edits all the way through from start to finish. They're involved in the whole process, but at the very end, the consensus group is the working group, and that group is going to be made up of seasoned professionals. So you're not going to have the newer people in the technical committee. And that technical committee, every person has to vote. Do you adopt this as an executive protection standard? And each person on that technical committee has to vote yes. If they vote no, we have to circle back and figure out, okay, why? What section did you disagree with? Let's work this out. It's kind of, like the Senate and Congress, right, of the US, going back and forth until everybody's a yes. Once everyone's a yes, okay, the working group can have seasoned professionals and those new people, the newer folks involved, because those newer folks, and I tell people this all the time, even if you're new, you may have something to contribute that those 40-year service guys don't have any visibility about, right? I remember, when I worked overseas, I was an advanced guy for many years, and I always carried a pack of cigarettes around with me because all the guards smoked. So I'd come up and I'd friend them up and be like, hey, you want a cigarette? Give them a light and all that. And that's how I started the conversations. Well, that's something you don't do now, right? Necessarily. So it's like those little pieces that a newer generation may know that would fix something I'm doing, right? I mean, look at the political correctness now today, right? You can't walk around, hey, babe, you can't do that. And then somebody knew me like, hey, that's a human resource issue now. You can't do that. So they're going to have bits and pieces to contribute. And like I said, we've got 170. I think we're up to 174 people that are involved, and I'm talking everyone from private business owners all the way up to a Fortune 100 CSO company CSO that's involved. So we've got the whole gamut of information, which is going to be really fantastic.
I love it. It sounds exciting and new. Lots of watch this space, and I guess then maybe a final question. What's next for you? Are you coming up with another book? Are you going on any world lecturing tours? What's your ask of the audience? Maybe
I think I would definitely say if anybody has any questions about the standard, we're trying to get out as much as possible. We do, there's videos online, doing this great podcast with you and reaching out to your audience. The standard isn't meant to be looked at as a hindrance. And I know some people look at it like, oh man, this is just something else. It's actually going to help. It's there to help the industry and help the individuals and ultimately help the client. The better service we can provide to them is what's most important. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not safe having no standards. And there's a ton of examples of that. So what's next for me is really this standard is going to take about 2 years worth of effort to get done and process. So really that's kind of my focus. Simultaneously, we are working on that certified executive protection professional designation because there's a lot of interest. I was on a call with a separate group, and there was a lot of people on the call, and there was some former Secret Service in there, and the former Secret Service guys were asking about a designation. They said, look, I don't need any more training. Like I've gotten, I have the training. I want something that's going to differentiate myself as a designation against others. Because when you meet somebody and you give them a business card, it doesn't say former Secret Service on there. But what it does say is it says your name and your designation. And that means, you don't have time to go through your CV with a new client or something like that, right? You hand a business card and you tell them who you are. So there is a lot of hunger out there for the standard and for the board certification. And that's really what I'll be focusing on. I do take people's feedback. If somebody emails me, I do respond. There was another concern, and I'll throw it out there. wasn't a question you had, but sounds like this is for a profit. We want to make money off of this. I personally have put in my own probably about $20,000 into this process, just between license, the licensing and application fees and processing fees of everything is just so expensive. And the process for us was, we want to establish a company so we could put the application in with ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, because to be a standards provider, you have to be a company, can't be an individual. So we did that. And then we applied for 501c. So we have our application in as a nonprofit, because it is important. We don't want the image that this is for money. Really, it's to my bones that I'm about customer service and good quality service in protection, and providing new people with the keys and tools that they need, providing excellent customer service to the client, and helping people out with career progression. That's kind of what I really enjoy about everything. And this is the route to do it. And it'll cost me money to do it, then so be it. It'll get done, and that's the goal. But to settle any of those things, we're not looking for profit. This is definitely not a profit maker for us. I mean, once we put the standard out, it's out there. I mean, how are you going to draw money from something that's already out, right? So again, it's really just to elevate the industry. Everybody's been talking about it for years. We're just the ones that are decided to saddle up and do it.
Okay, I love it. Well, so James, it's been a pleasure having you on. Really pleased we got this time together. Thanks for all your help and support, and I look forward to welcoming you again on another Circuit Magazine podcast.
So hey, I appreciate your time. Honestly, more we can answer questions and settle doubt. That's what we're here to do, because I think it's a great thing.
Thank you very much. Fantastic to hear it from James Cameron himself. I think the board is onto something. I guess the question is, how viable is it in today's EP landscape? Obviously, I'm back with Sean, and we're two Brits talking about the situation in the States. But I think, again, that's a good thing, because we can sort of look in from the outside and be a little bit more, neutral. Sean, what do you think about this initiative, and particularly, I guess, the working groups and the way in which the standard is sort of coming together?
Well, I think your first question, you were asking, is this going to be viable? And I think absolutely, it will certainly be viable, but it's going to be a long road ahead, and you're going to have to get a lot of buy-in from the industry, the training schools who work within the industry. The benefits of having the working groups is you have the knowledge of these schools who are already up and running. They're already training students. They have their alumni. So there's a lot of knowledge there, but you will find you'll have some training schools that are for licensing, some who are against it. So I think what you've got to do is you've got to set the road out, set the path out, and give everyone, some milestones. By this date, this is the aim when we're going to have licensing in place. And there's going to be a period of time beforehand where these working groups get together. They put forward their opinions, what they believe should be included in licensing, what the standard should be. And then you could have your neutral party, at the top, who receives all of this information, and they set the standard, but they have no commercial interest, in licensing. Maybe there's someone who's spent 30, 40 years in the industry. They've been there, they've seen it, they've done it, and they can advise to the advisory board. They set the standard out, and then the EP schools, they have to get on board. But yeah, I don't envy being, the training schools, because they are going to be held to account, and that's a good thing.
It is a good thing, isn't it? And I guess it will help people make better decisions. Over in Europe, quote unquote, there was the PISA process to standardize higher education. Would you believe it? People didn't do bachelor's and master's and PhDs in some countries. They had all manner of different titles, and now they are more standardized, and that reciprocity seems to be shining through. But with EP and the working groups, I foresee some challenges when maybe some people are not in the working groups who have been invited but are not in there. because that will forever be a hole. And as you say, you need the schools to get on board with this. But in a way, we need to ensure that the schools benefit, but then they can't benefit too much because it can't be commercial. It's a really big, tricky thing, especially in the States where, at least from the outside looking in, it appears that training schools have very strong alumni. And that alumni community could be key in fostering this. Plus, do we need an ISO and not an American standard? I don't know. But these are the things that we've been able to hash out with James, and I'm really pleased we've had him on. And as I said at the beginning, there have been lots of comments on social media with opinions about this. So it's really good to hear, right, what are the board really trying to do? And how can we get involved? Which I think is a positive thing. Coming up, though, we have a virtual Circuit Magazine event on a topic that we will reveal shortly. So we're looking for contributors. And it's going to, as we had last week with David Rubens, be on learning and development as a topic. You may remember, Sean, we did the first Circuit Magazine virtual event back in 2020 on learning and development. So again, there's a bit of a tie into today's event. People have a limited budget and they need to spend it wisely. But also there's an element of the time involved. So hopefully through that event, we're going to help you short circuit the time involved for selection and, not going on courses that perhaps look sparkly, but don't take you anywhere, which is always a challenge. We're looking for articles, aren't we, Sean? Always looking for articles. What would you say to someone who has been thinking about writing an article, but they've said, I don't know if I'm a writer. I don't know if anyone wants to hear my voice. What words of encouragement could you give them?
I'm sure everybody would like to hear your voice, whether you're a newcomer to the industry, you're an industry veteran, you're someone who's got a unique niche within the industry. You may be, paramedic, your skill may be advanced driving and teaching, and the teaching of that. No matter where your entry point or where you are currently in your career, you'll be able to add some knowledge that people reading the magazine can benefit from. Our readership is wide. It's read by industry veterans, newcomers, and some of the stories that's written and the knowledge that's passed on through the pages can greatly help someone who's looking to get into the industry. So don't worry if you're not a writer. I'm not a writer either, and I write the foreword every month. All of your words will be valued, I'm sure, by our readership.
Absolutely. Yeah, we really appreciate it. And you've got to imagine, these are your peers, these are your colleagues, right? They want to read from people actually doing things, not, of course, there's room for academia and theoretical stuff, but they want to hear from someone just like you.
I think a lot of time as well, putting things down in words, helps you think more about the subject, and you can gain from writing. You're getting your name out in the industry. It's a good place to start. So please send your articles in.
It is, isn't it? I like it. On my side, I'm welcoming some of our Colorado community to a Denver specific virtual event next week. There's some, friendly faces in the industry, and I know a long-time listener, Jay Martin, for example, is kindly speaking. So I thought I'd do a little bit of a Colorado shout out as well, because I know Jay also listens to this podcast. But apart from that, keep an eye out for our virtual event and keep the debate about training and development going. With podcasts such as this, we are trying to shine a light on an area that people are already talking about, right? It's not just, we don't just shine lights on areas no one's talking about. We're trying to keep with the times, and this is an important topic. So from Sean and myself, it's been a great pleasure to speak today with James Cameron, and we're delighted to see the progress of the Board of Executive Protection Professionals. And we look forward to welcoming you to another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.